The first sign that something was seriously wrong came exactly 17 minutes after Judge Stone made his comment. His secretary, Linda, knocked on his chamber door with an expression he had never seen before. Her usually calm face looked worried and confused. "Judge Stone," she said quietly, "the phones haven't stopped ringing. I've gotten 12 calls in the past 15 minutes, and they're all from news reporters." Judge Stone looked up from the legal brief he was reading. "Reporters? What do they want?" "They're asking about something you said in court today. About—" Linda paused, clearly uncomfortable. "About Barron Trump." For the first time since making his comment, Judge Stone felt a cold feeling in his stomach. He had been a judge long, enough to know that when reporters start calling about something you said, it usually means trouble. "What exactly are they asking?" he said, setting down his papers. "They want to know if you'll comment on your statement. Some are asking if you plan to apologize. One reporter asked if you think it was appropriate for a judge to make personal comments about a former president's child." Judge Stone felt the room spinning slightly. He had made what he thought was a simple legal comparison, but clearly others saw it differently. "Tell them I have no comment," he said, though his voice sounded less confident than usual. While Linda dealt with the phone calls, something much bigger was happening outside the courthouse. Within minutes of Judge Stone's comment, someone in the courtroom had posted about it on social media. The post was simple. "Judge just made shocking comment about Barron Trump in court. Can't believe what I just heard." That single post was shared 6 times in the first minute, then 12 times, then 24. Within half an hour, it had been shared over 300 times. People who weren't even in the courtroom began commenting and sharing their opinions about what the judge had said. A court reporter who had been live tweeting the proceedings posted the exact quote. This tweet exploded even faster than the first post. News outlets that monitor social media for breaking stories picked it up immediately. Within an hour, major news websites were running stories with headlines like, "Federal Judge Makes Controversial Statement About Trump Family Member." The speed at which the story spread was incredible. In the old days, it might have taken hours or even days for news to travel from a courtroom to the general public. But in the age of smartphones and social media, Judge Stone's words were being discussed by thousands of people before he had even finished his afternoon court session. At the local television station, the news director was having an emergency meeting with his staff. "I want someone at the courthouse right now," he said. "Get interviews with anyone who was in that courtroom. Find out exactly what the judge said and why he said it." The station's courthouse reporter, a young woman who had covered legal proceedings for 3 years, grabbed her camera operator and rushed to the scene. She had been following the privacy rights case but had left early to cover another story. Now she was kicking herself for missing what was apparently the biggest courthouse story of the year. Back in his chambers, Judge Stone was beginning to understand the magnitude of what was happening. His chief of staff, an experienced court administrator, who had worked in the legal system for over 20 years, came into his office with a grim expression. "Judge, we need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "This situation is escalating very quickly. The State Judicial Conduct Board has already received 2 formal complaints about your comment. The courthouse public information officer is being bombarded with media requests." Judge Stone sat down heavily in his chair. "I was just making a legal point about privacy rights in public figures. I didn't mean anything personal by it." "I understand that," his chief of staff replied. "But that's not how it's being interpreted. People are saying you crossed a line by bringing up a specific person, especially someone who was a minor until recently." The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. Judge Stone had always prided himself on his professionalism and his ability to stay above political controversies. He had built his reputation on being fair, thoughtful, and measured in his words. Now, with one careless comment, all of that seemed to be at risk. Outside the courthouse, the situation was becoming even more chaotic. A local news van had arrived and was setting up for a live broadcast. The reporter was interviewing people who had been in the courtroom, asking them to describe what they had witnessed. "I couldn't believe what I was hearing," said one woman who had been observing the trial. "Judges are supposed to be neutral. They're not supposed to make personal comments about people, especially young people who can't defend themselves. Another observer had a different perspective. "I think people are overreacting," he said. "The judge was just trying to make a legal point. Everyone's being too sensitive." These conflicting viewpoints were exactly what news outlets love. The story had drama, controversy, and multiple sides that people could debate. It was perfect for the 24-hour news cycle that always needs fresh content. The court's public information officer, a middle-aged man who usually dealt with routine media inquiries, was overwhelmed. His phone rang constantly, and his email inbox was filling up faster than he could respond. Reporters from local stations, national news outlets, and even international media were all asking for the same thing: an official statement from Judge Stone about his comment. "The judge has no comment at this time," became his standard response, but it wasn't satisfying anyone. Reporters kept pushing for more information, asking about the judge's background, his previous cases, and whether he had ever made similar comments before. Meanwhile, legal experts across the country were being contacted by news outlets to provide their opinions on Judge Stone's comment. Some defended him, saying that judges sometimes need to use real-world examples to illustrate legal principles. Others criticized him harshly, arguing that his comment was inappropriate and showed poor judgment. A retired federal judge who had served for 30 years told one news outlet, "Judges must be extremely careful about their words. Even comments that seem innocent can be misinterpreted and can damage public confidence in the judicial system." A law professor from a prestigious university had a different view. "Context matters," she said. "If the judge was genuinely trying to illustrate a legal point about privacy rights, then perhaps people are reading too much into his comment." These expert opinions were being broadcast on television and shared online, adding more fuel to the growing fire. Every perspective seemed to generate more discussion and more controversy. Back in the courthouse, other judges were beginning to take notice. During a brief break between cases, several of them gathered in the judge's lounge to discuss what was happening. Most had heard about Stone's comment through courthouse gossip, but now they were seeing it on the news. "This is exactly why we need to be so careful about what we say," one judge commented. "One wrong word can destroy a career." Another judge was more sympathetic. "We've all made comments that could be taken the wrong way. Stone just had the bad luck to have reporters in the room when he made his." The conversation among the judges reflected the broader debate happening across the country. Some people saw Judge Stone's comment as a serious breach of judicial ethics. Others viewed it as a minor mistake that was being blown out of proportion by the media and social media. As the afternoon wore on, the story continued to grow. News websites were updating their articles with new information and additional expert opinions. Social media discussions were becoming more heated, with people taking strong positions on both sides of the issue. Judge Stone, still in his chambers, was trying to process what was happening. He had always been careful about his public statements, but clearly he had made a significant error in judgment. The question now was what to do about it. His phone rang again. This time it wasn't a reporter. It was his old friend and mentor, retired Judge Patricia Mills, who had heard about the situation and wanted to offer advice. "Andrew," she said, her voice serious but caring, "I've been following what's happening. You need to understand that this isn't going to go away on its own. You need to think carefully about how you're going to respond." Judge Stone felt a wave of gratitude for his mentor's call, but also a deep sense of regret. He had always respected Judge Mills's wisdom, and her concern made him realize just how serious this situation had become. The day that had started as a routine court session was turning into one of the most challenging of his career. By 6 o'clock that evening, Judge Stone's name was trending on 3 different social media platforms. The story had grown far beyond what anyone could have imagined when he made his comment just hours earlier. What started as a courtroom observation had become a national conversation about judicial conduct, ethics, and the treatment of public figures' families. Judge Stone sat in his home office, staring at his computer screen in disbelief. The major news websites all had his story as their top headline. Cable news channels were running segments about his comment every hour. His photograph, taken from the courthouse website, was being shown alongside headlines that made him cringe. His wife, Catherine, knocked softly on the office door before entering. She had been a teacher for 30 years before retiring, and she understood how quickly situations could spiral out of control in the age of social media. But even she was shocked by the scale of what was happening. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing," she said quietly. "I've been letting it go to voicemail, but the reporters are persistent. One called 6 times in the past hour." Judge Stone looked up at his wife with tired eyes. "I never intended for this to happen, Catherine. I was just trying to make a legal point about privacy rights. I thought I was helping clarify the law." Catherine sat down in the chair across from his desk. "I know you didn't mean any harm, Andrew, but you have to understand how your words sounded to other people. You mentioned a specific young person by name in a way that seemed to judge his right to privacy." The weight of her words hit him hard. Judge Stone had always prided himself on being fair and considerate, especially when it came to young people. As a father of 2 grown children, he understood the importance of protecting kids from unnecessary public scrutiny. Yet somehow, in his attempt to make a legal point, he had done exactly the opposite. Outside their suburban home, the situation was becoming uncomfortable. 2 news vans had parked across the street, and reporters with cameras were positioned on the sidewalk. Neighbors were starting to gather, some out of curiosity and others out of concern for the judge and his family. Mrs. Henderson, their elderly neighbor who had lived next door for 15 years, came over to check on them. "I can't believe all this commotion," she said, peering through the front window curtains. "You've always been such good neighbors. This whole thing seems blown out of proportion." But not everyone in the neighborhood felt the same way. A few houses down, a young mother was telling her husband that she was disappointed in Judge Stone's comment. How would he feel if someone in authority made public comments about his own children? She asked. These divided opinions were playing out across the entire country. Social media was filled with people defending the judge and others calling for his resignation. The story had touched a nerve about how public figures and their families should be treated, especially young adults who grew up in the spotlight. At the State Judicial Conduct Board office, the situation was unprecedented. The board typically received a few complaints per month about judges across the state. But in just one day, they had received over 40 formal complaints about Judge Stone's comment. The board's director, a soft-spoken woman who had worked in judicial oversight for 12 years, had never seen anything like it. "We need to fast-track this review," she told her staff during an emergency meeting. "The public attention on this case means we can't handle it through our normal slow process. People are watching to see how we respond." The complaints varied in their tone and content. Some were written by lawyers who felt Judge Stone had violated judicial ethics. Others came from ordinary citizens who were offended by his comment. Few were from parents who worried about the impact of his words on young people everywhere. One complaint stood out to the board members. It was written by a retired teacher who had taught civics for over 20 years. She wrote, "Judges are supposed to be examples of fairness and restraint. When they make careless comments about specific individuals, especially young people, they damage public trust in our entire legal system." Meanwhile, the evening news programs were having a field day with the story. Legal analysts were brought on to discuss whether Judge Stone's comment constituted judicial misconduct. Former judges were interviewed about the standards of behavior expected from those on the bench. One retired federal judge speaking on a national news program was particularly critical. "Judges must understand that their words carry tremendous weight," he said. "We are not ordinary citizens who can speak carelessly. Every public statement we make reflects on the integrity of the judicial system." But another legal expert disagreed. "We need to be careful not to overcorrect here," she argued during the same program. "Judges are human beings who sometimes misspeak. If we hold them to impossible standards, we might discourage good people from wanting to serve on the bench." This debate was exactly what kept the story alive. News producers love controversies that have multiple sides and generate strong opinions. Judge Stone's comment had all the elements of a perfect media storm: authority figures, ethics questions, political undertones, and passionate defenders on both sides. Back at the courthouse, the impact was being felt throughout the building. Other judges were fielding questions from reporters about their colleagues' comment. Court staff members were dealing with increased media attention and public interest. The courthouse security had to be increased because of the number of reporters and protesters gathering outside. The chief judge of the court system called an emergency meeting with senior staff. "We need to figure out how to handle this situation," he said. "Judge Stone's comment is reflecting on all of us, and we need to protect the integrity of our court system." Some staff members suggested that Judge Stone should be encouraged to take a temporary leave of absence until the controversy died down. Others argued that would make him look guilty of serious wrongdoing, when he had simply made a poor choice of words. The discussion revealed how difficult these situations can be for institutions. They want to support their colleagues, but they also need to maintain public confidence. The balance between loyalty and accountability is never easy to find. As the evening progressed, Judge Stone received a phone call that made his stomach drop even further. It was from the state's largest newspaper, and they were planning to run a major editorial about his comment in the next day's edition. "We wanted to give you a chance to respond to our editorial before it runs," the editorial page editor said. "We're calling for you to publicly apologize and consider whether you should continue serving on the bench." Judge Stone felt like the walls were closing in around him. A major newspaper editorial calling for his resignation would make the situation even worse. Other news outlets would pick up the story, and the pressure would continue to build. Gert. Night. He couldn't sleep. He kept replaying his comment in his mind, trying to understand how something he thought was a simple legal illustration had turned into a career-threatening crisis. He thought about all the cases he had handled fairly. Over the years, all the times he had protected people's rights and dignity. Would all of that be forgotten because of one careless moment? Catherine found him in the kitchen at 3 a.m, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. "You need to get some sleep," she said gently. "I keep thinking." "About what you said earlier," he replied, "about how my words might have sounded to other people. I was so focused on making my legal point that I didn't think about the human impact." "That's the Andrew I married," Catherine said, sitting down beside him. "The man who cares about how his actions affect other people. Maybe this situation is terrible, but at least it's reminding you of what really matters." Her words hit him deeply. Judge Stone realized that somewhere along the way he had become so comfortable in his authority that he had stopped thinking carefully about the impact of his words. He had treated a real person as if he were just a hypothetical example. In a law school textbook, the next morning brought even worse news. The newspaper editorial was harsh and unforgiving. It questioned not just his comment but his fitness to serve as a judge. The headline read, "When Judges Forget Their Duty to Show Restraint." The editorial argued that Judge Stone's comment showed a fundamental misunderstanding of his role. "Judges are not political commentators or social critics," it read. "They are supposed to be neutral arbiters who show respect for all people who come before them, directly or indirectly." Other newspapers across the state began running their own editorials, some supporting the call for his resignation, and others defending his right to continue serving. The story was no longer just about one comment in one courtroom. It had become a broader discussion about judicial conduct and accountability. Judge Stone sat in his chambers that morning, reading the editorial coverage and trying to figure out his next move. His reputation, built over 15 years of careful service, seemed to be crumbling around him. The question was whether he could rebuild it or whether the damage was permanent. For the first time in his career, Judge Stone truly understood the awesome responsibility that came with wearing judicial robes. Every word mattered. Every decision had consequences beyond the immediate case. And once words were spoken, they could never be taken back. The reckoning he was facing wasn't just about his career. It was about the kind of person he wanted to be and the kind of judge he had promised to be when he first took his oath of office. 3 days after the controversy began, Judge Stone made one of the hardest decisions of his career. He would issue a public apology. Not the kind of apology that lawyers write to avoid legal trouble, but a genuine acknowledgement that he had made a serious mistake. He spent hours writing and rewriting his statement, Every word had to be perfect because he knew it would be analyzed and criticized by thousands of people. His wife Catherine sat with him as he worked on draft after draft, helping him find the right tone. "I want people to know that I understand what I did wrong," he told her as he read through his latest version. "But I also don't want to sound like I'm just saying what people want to hear." The final statement was 3 paragraphs long. In it, Judge Stone admitted that his comment was inappropriate and showed poor judgment. He acknowledged that his words could have hurt a young person who never chose to be in the public eye. Most importantly, he took full responsibility without making excuses or blaming others. When the statement was released to the media, the reaction was mixed. Some people appreciated his honesty and willingness to admit his mistake. Others felt that an apology wasn't enough and that he should face more serious consequences. A local television reporter interviewed people on the street about Judge Stone's apology. "At least he's owning up to what he did," said one middle-aged man. "That's more than most public figures do these days." But a young woman had a different perspective. "Sorry doesn't undo the damage," she said. "He's a judge. He should have known better in the first place." These divided reactions showed how difficult it can be to rebuild trust once it's been damaged. Some people were willing to give Judge Stone a second chance, while others felt that his position required higher standards that he had failed to meet. The State Judicial Conduct Board took 2 weeks to complete their investigation. During that time, Judge Stone continued to handle his regular caseload, but the atmosphere in his courtroom was different. Lawyers were more formal with him, and he noticed that some avoided making eye contact. The board's final decision was a formal reprimand. This meant that Judge Stone's mistake would become part of his permanent record, but he wouldn't be removed from the bench or suspended. The board's statement said that while his comment was inappropriate, it appeared to be an isolated incident from a judge with an otherwise strong record. Judge Stone felt relieved that he could continue serving, but the reprimand was still a serious blow to his reputation. In the legal community, formal reprimands are rare and significant. Everyone in the courthouse would know about it, and it would follow him for the rest of his career. But Judge Stone didn't stop with just the apology and accepting the reprimand. He made a personal decision that surprised many people. He voluntarily enrolled in additional judicial ethics training, even though it wasn't required. He also made a substantial donation to a national organization that works to protect children of public figures from unwanted media attention. These actions weren't announced with fanfare or press releases. Judge Stone did them quietly, not to gain positive publicity, but because he genuinely wanted to learn from his mistake and make amends in whatever way he could. The additional ethics training was more challenging than he expected. The instructor, a retired judge who specialized in judicial conduct, didn't go easy on him despite his years of experience on the bench. "Experience can sometimes make us complacent," the instructor told the small class. "We think we know all the rules, so we stop being as careful as we should be. But the moment we stop thinking carefully about our words and actions is the moment we risk making serious mistakes." Judge Stone found himself taking notes like a first-year law student. The training covered topics he thought he knew well, but he was seeing them from a new perspective. He learned about the psychological impact that authority figures can have on ordinary people, especially when they make comments about specific individuals. One session focused specifically on social media and how quickly statements can spread in the modern world. 30 years ago, if a judge made an inappropriate comment in court, maybe a few dozen people would hear about it, the instructor explained. Today, that same comment can be seen by millions of people within hours. This lesson hit particularly close to home for Judge Stone. He had grown up in an era when public mistakes stayed relatively private. He was still adjusting to a world where every word could potentially become international news. The training also covered the special responsibility that judges have when discussing public figures and their families. "We must remember that real people are affected by our words," the instructor emphasized. "Just because someone is famous doesn't mean they or their children deserve less consideration and respect." Meanwhile, the controversy was having lasting effects on Judge Stone's career in ways he hadn't expected. When judicial elections came up the following year, he faced his first serious challenger in over a decade. His opponent, a younger lawyer with prosecutorial experience, made judicial temperament and ethics central themes of her campaign. She never mentioned Judge Stone's controversial comment directly, but her message was clear. Voters deserved a judge who would think carefully before speaking. The campaign was uncomfortable for Judge Stone. For 15 years, his elections had been routine affairs with little opposition. Now he found himself having to defend his record and convince voters that one mistake shouldn't define his entire career. During candidate forums, he was repeatedly asked about the incident. Each time he gave the same honest answer. He had made a serious error in judgment, he had learned from it, and he was committed to being more thoughtful in the future. "I can't change what I said," he told one audience, "but I can promise you that I've learned from this experience and that it has made me a better judge." Some voters were persuaded by his honesty and his long record of fair decisions. Others felt that his mistake showed a fundamental flaw in his judgment that couldn't be overcome. The election was much closer than anyone had expected, with Judge Stone winning by only a few percentage points. The narrow victory was both a relief and a wake-up call. Judge Stone realized that his reputation in the community had been permanently affected by his comment. He would have to work twice as hard to rebuild the trust he had lost. But perhaps the most significant change was in how Judge Stone approached his daily work. He became much more thoughtful about his words, not just in high-profile cases, but in every interaction. He started pausing before speaking, asking himself whether his words might hurt someone or be misunderstood. His court clerk, Linda, noticed the change immediately. "He's always been a careful judge," she told a colleague, "but now he's even more deliberate about everything he says. It's like he's constantly aware that his words have power." The transformation wasn't just professional. It was personal. Judge Stone found himself being more careful in his conversations with friends and family. He thought more deeply about the impact of his words on others, especially young people. A year after the controversy, Judge Stone was invited to speak at a judicial training conference about ethics and public communication. Many people were surprised that he accepted the invitation, but he felt he had something important to share. "I made a mistake that I'll regret for the rest of my career," he told the audience of judges and court personnel. "But that mistake taught me something valuable about the responsibility we carry every day. Our words have power, and we must use that power carefully." He talked about how easy it is to become comfortable in authority and stop thinking about the human impact of judicial comments. He shared what he had learned in his additional ethics training and how it had changed his approach to his work. Tunto. Response to his presentation was overwhelmingly positive. Many judges in the audience said they had learned from his experience and would be more careful about their own words. Some thanked him privately for his honesty about his mistake. 2 years after the incident, Judge Stone encountered a young law student during a courthouse tour. The student recognized his name and asked him directly about the controversial comment. That had made national news. Judge Stone paused for a moment, remembering all the pain and embarrassment the incident had caused, but he also thought about everything he had learned since then. "I made a serious mistake," he told the student. "I said something that was hurtful and inappropriate, and I learned that being a judge requires not just knowledge of the law, but wisdom about when and how to speak. Sometimes the wisest thing a judge can do is remain silent." The student nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think people can really change after making big mistakes?" Judge Stone smiled slightly. "I hope so. I know I'm not the same judge I was before this happened. The experience was painful, but it taught me to be more thoughtful, more careful, and more aware of how my words affect real people." Looking back, Judge Stone realized that his controversial comment had been one of the most difficult but important learning experiences of his career. It had cost him professionally and personally, but it had also made him a better judge and a better person. The incident became a case study in judicial training programs across the country. Law schools used it to teach students about the responsibilities that come with judicial authority. Ethics instructors pointed to it as an example of how quickly careers can be damaged by careless words. But for Judge Stone himself, the real lesson was simpler and more personal. He had learned that with great power comes great responsibility, and that responsibility extends to every word spoken from the bench. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his career, a reminder that judges are human, but must strive to be better than human in their public service. The controversy that had threatened to end his career had instead transformed it, making him a more thoughtful, humble, and effective judge than he had ever been before.